A huge thank you to everyone who's continued to support my work on Talk Beliefs. I now have a Patreon campaign where all contributions go towards the cost of travel, audio and video equipment, and fees to religious events that I fully intend to continue to infiltrate. Thank you.
Okay, Sean, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, how are you doing over there, the other side of the world in Australia?
Great, thanks. Lots of rain.
And we got the opposite here, which is very strange for England.
Yes, please send our summer back sometime soon.
Okay, I will. So, Sean Powery, thank you very much indeed for talking with us on Talk Beliefs. So, before we get to the interview, can you tell us a little bit about your background?
Sure. So, my name is Sean, and I'm originally from South Africa. I was raised in LDS, well, Mormon LDS, and I worked as a missionary, also in England, actually, in Manchester, Liverpool, that area, in 2007 to 2009. And then I moved to Sydney, where I live now and work. And later on, a couple of years after finishing being a missionary, I went through an experience of losing my faith in the LDS Church and in Mormonism, and experienced a faith transition where I came out in the end being, you could say, an agnostic atheist.
Right. So you grew up a Mormon, as you just said, a part of the LDS Church, which for anybody who doesn't know is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Can you talk just briefly about the LDS Church and how it differs from Christian churches? And then what was it like growing up Mormon?
Sure, absolutely. Well, the LDS Church, I mean, firstly, in terms of category, is a restorationist Christian sect, which basically means they believe that after Jesus Christ came, some events occurred and there was some kind of apostasy or loss of truth that was significant enough that it couldn't just be reformed like reformers would, but that it had to be restored. So restorationist Christians believe that God has to come, or had to come at some point, and intervene in this progression of Christianity and say, hey guys, it's time for me to bring back the pure original gospel of Jesus Christ. So Mormons are within that category, and they're the prophet that Mormons believe in, the first prophet, was in the 1800s, early 1800s. His name is Joseph Smith. I think this name is quite well known. People have heard of this name quite often. So in a nutshell, that's Mormonism, restorationist Christianity with a particular flavor of their own doctrines.
Okay, so Sean, you eventually left the church and now consider yourself an ex-Mormon, perhaps an atheist or agnostic. So tell us about that journey and why you started to doubt.
Sure, absolutely. Well, it's definitely a long and complex journey, but I'll try to highlight some of the most important elements. I'd say for me personally, it didn't start at any particular point. In fact, I think for most people of most faiths, there is some element of doubt that always hangs on the horizon for everyone, no matter how faithful in whichever religion. So for me, there was always an element of doubt, but it was certainly contained within my massive faith and belief for a long period of time. What happened eventually is I reached a point in my life where I became more educated, and I learned about science, about philosophy, psychology, and I also came to a point of realizing that through my own introspection, realizing that I had a lot of fear in my life. This is something that sort of happened after watching a movie that really inspired me. And one day I realized, hey, why am I afraid of information that might cause me to reconsider my beliefs? And so from this realization came the beginning, sort of the seed, which is to say, hey, if what you believe is true, then it can withstand indefinite intellectual, you could say, analysis or interrogation. So basically I reached that point where I felt, well, look, if I sincerely believe this is true, then I should be able to analyze it from an intellectual standpoint, and it should be able to withstand that indefinitely. And so I began a journey, and the intention at the beginning of this journey was actually to become more faithful, but the result was the opposite. The result was a complete loss of faith, which was very unexpected for me at the time. It caught me by surprise, but it was a life-changing and incredible journey.
Yeah, oh God, I'm sure it is. So, as with most people who leave a lifelong belief system, you had to, as you had to readjust. So, was this a particularly difficult time for you?
It was definitely the hardest time of my life, and I think one of the major elements that made it difficult was a large and ongoing dose of cognitive dissonance, which continued until a sort of point of inflection where I switched. It's kind of like the scales. You have the evidence in favor of both worldviews. Growing up with this worldview, it seems very much in favor. And then eventually, you know, the evidence that I researched reached a tipping point where there was an inflection to where the worldview switched over. And I call that the moment where doubt becomes disbelief. That's the distinction. I think doubt is part, you know, something that relates to faith, but disbelief is just complete and utter lack of faith. But, you know, having said that, it was definitely a very difficult period of time, but it's something that over time one can heal from. And I think I took the necessary steps in my life to move on and heal from that journey, steps which I think some people who go through such a journey may not have necessarily taken. And I think it takes some people quite a lot longer to heal, but I decided to take some proactive steps in order to heal, I guess, a bit faster.
It's really great to hear. And what I wanted to ask you is, do you regard Mormonism as a cult? I know some people do regard it as such. But as you look back, would you define Mormonism as a cult?
Well, I think that's a fantastic question, and I do remember not just when I was a missionary, but in other occasions, having received this critique that Mormonism is a cult. And I've thought about whether or not to define it as such, and I've tried to be fair and balanced in that analysis. And so I'd like to do a quick plug to a man named Stephen Hassan. Have you heard of this man?
Yes, he's written a couple of things on cults, hasn't he?
Yes, yeah, he is a very thoughtful, very knowledgeable man, also coming from a background of being in a cult himself. So reading his book, Combating Cult Mind Control, I would say that in order to properly define, properly keep the definition of what a cult is and is not, I wouldn't consider Mormonism to be entirely or unequivocally a cult. That said, I do think there's a degree of undue influence and high demand. I think you could characterize it much more easily characterize it as a high demand organization that has undue influence on followers based on the definitions given by Stephen Hassan. Nevertheless, in terms of cult definition, I think that as I read Stephen Hassan's book, I feel like being a missionary is much more like the cultish element of Mormonism, where you consider leaving your family for a period of 2 years. For some people, their family aren't necessarily Mormons, so for them it's goodbye to my child for 2 years. You can't speak to them very often, only once a week over email, twice a year through phone calls. So definitely there are elements of that mission experience that are quite cult-like, probably way more than generic Mormonism.
Sean, I think it's safe to say that most people have had Mormon missionaries come to their door or seen them in the street. You did a mission for the church, as you said. Can you explain the Mormon missionary program and how you feel about your mission now that you are out of Mormonism?
Sure. So as for the missionary program, basically there's an expectation, at least for young men who reach the age of 18, 19, to leave their home and wherever they live for a period of 2 years to serve a voluntary mission. So most often they travel either within their country or to another country, but definitely away from home. And they work as volunteers, as full-time proselytizing missionaries. This is for lack of a better word, sales force of the LDS Church. Without a doubt, these were two of the most interesting years of my life. I did make a lot of good friends on my mission, and mainly missionaries who were working with me. And I still talk with them, some of them quite often, some of them even weekly. Some of them, actually quite a few that I know personally, don't believe in Mormonism themselves. So we, including one missionary who I trained. So what's interesting to realize is that you can look almost 10 years ago at this scenario where you have two missionaries, one is training the other, and now fast forward 9-10 years later and neither of them are believing anymore. And we were working together for quite a period of time. So I definitely grew a lot in my mission. I wouldn't trade that growth for anything. It really was a life-changing experience. I grew a lot of ambition and interest for the world. I saw a different perspective. I went to a different country. You know, the general effects that travel has on a person. I definitely saw the various levels of society, spent a lot of time outdoors speaking with people. So, you know, that growth was incredible. Part of me wishes I could have that same growth, but in a different context, maybe through something like travel around the world, or through doing just plain service for people, some kind of voluntary work. But in any case, it was an amazing experience. I've actually healed a lot from that journey, and I did suffer depression on my mission at certain points, certainly not the entire time, but there were certain very, very difficult points. And I think most missionaries do suffer depression at some points before they manage to move on from that. And I think that there are definitely elements of feelings of guilt that now I view as wholly unnecessary. For instance, you know, the feeling that you as a missionary are unworthy, and that's why you're not able to convert more people. And I think that is definitely an unfair and unnecessary sort of abuse, you could say, emotional, psychological abuse that missionaries endure due to the tenets and the beliefs that they have.
I suppose it's not just something that's isolated to a few people. I suppose a lot of these youngsters do actually go through the whole gamut of emotions because of the expectations on their shoulders.
Yeah.
I just want to ask very quickly, what country did you go to? Where did they send you?
Oh, they sent me to England. So I went from South Africa to England, to Manchester, to name some specific places, if you like. I worked in Warrington, Rochdale, Oldham, Telford, and Chorley. So I worked in those 5 areas. There's a temple in Chorley, so I worked right there next to where the LDS temple is, yes.
Oh, okay, in Chorley, right. Okay, so Shawn, now that you're out of Mormonism, are you involved in any activism in any way?
Well, that's an interesting question. I don't, for the sake of preserving the meaning of word activist, I don't think I would characterize myself as one. You know, in other words, to not take away from people who are real activists. Nevertheless, I do try to do some things in order to help, you could call it, move the wave forward, the wave that I went from faith to disbelief. I do some things in order to help others. So I started a support group here in Australia that is specifically for transitioning Mormons and transitioning religious people. There are some other people who are either ex-Jehovah's Witnesses or ex-Anglicans or ex-Seventh-day Adventists who I just have happened to meet in my journeys after leaving LDS belief, and these people have wanted to join the group as well. So we have some very interesting discussions and compare and contrast our journeys. They're all very similar. So definitely giving people some space to experience this, to have a safe place to go through that journey. That's what I wanted to do, given that it was such a difficult journey for me. I wanted to help others go through that and not be as lonely, if I could put it that way, as I was during that journey. I have a blog wherein I discuss different ideas related to Mormonism and doctrine, and basically speak about, sort of critique it or analyze it, but in a non-antagonistic way. But aside from that, I don't think I do very much. I've actually decided in some ways I've gotten my life back, and so I've decided to do a lot of other constructive things with my time as well.
Well, it sounds actually like you are doing quite a bit to help people who've come out of religion. So we can actually put a couple links in the description if you want, for your blog and also for your support group. So anyone who's interested can click on and come on over and see what it's all about.
That would be great.
Okay, excellent. So Shawn, thank you so much for being so open and honest. I know you've been on a rough road, but glad to see that you're in a really good place now. And we'll be returning for a part 2 of this interview where we'll explore some ideas for talking to Mormon missionaries, should you encounter them, and how to probably challenge them, debate them, and hopefully to get them thinking. So that should be fun. We look forward to seeing you back here for that.
Thank you so much. It's been great to be here with you.